in the space was one that came out about 12 or 14 years ago. It's still relevant. And it came from MIT, from the MIT Technology Review. And the title was, Why Software Sucks. Okay? And it really is that simple. So I'm also a former, right? Okay. So this just isn't going to happen. So I'm also a former developer. I cut my teeth on 4-bit and 8-bit machines. PDP 1170 was the first real computer that I programmed on. It was a great machine. PDP, yeah, a killer machine, yeah. But in my experience in programming, one of the things I discovered was really astonishing to me. It was very early in my career. I was invited to work for the DIA as a contractor, and I didn't have my clearances yet. And so they said, well, we'd like you to start by writing this piece of software that just counts free blocks on the disks. And you don't have access, so you'll have to put it on a tape and then we'll install it and so forth. So I diligently set about writing this program. And I installed it on a tape, and this is back in 1979. I wrote an extract script that was on the tape. I put a label on the tape, and on the label I said, do this. Mount the tape, create this directory, extract the first file, change the execution on it to allow it to be executed, and execute it. And when it's done, it'll print out the numbers 55. That will tell you that it actually ran, installed correctly, and everything's fine. And it was about a week and a half later that the phone rang, and it was exciting. Right, I answered the phone, and this guy said, I got this tape, what do I do? Yeah, so this is the problem, right? It's the problem. So they installed it. I never heard back. About 2 months later, we had this all-hands meeting, and they said, Vic, can you get up? And I got up, punishment, right? Certain punishment. Probably have to talk in public or something, just something brutal. And they said, Vic, we're giving you this award for writing the first piece of software that didn't develop a single bug in it. And I said, that's just my job, so, but that's the problem. And software is not designed, it's not conceived, it's usually not written in any way that makes it a reliable product, or a product that can withstand circumstances that the developer in their haze failed to anticipate. And so it's very easy to penetrate networks. It's very easy to get your data. So what do you do? Well, you can start small, right? You can change the kind of platform that you use. That's a personal choice that you have, but you can't make that personal choice in most environments. Most environments are constructed in a way that doesn't really lend itself towards defending the data. They have this antiquated notion that there's an actual perimeter, which is just a fantasy, right? I mean, the Jericho Foundation, what was it, 20 years ago now? Jericho Organization Forum, Jericho Forum, said there is no perimeter. The perimeter is dead. Firewalls, it's a fantasy, right? It's it's point to point. That's what it's all about. It's point to point. You either trust the points or you don't. So trust in endpoints is, to your statement earlier, is really critical, that you have to be able to trust the platform. So this thing just kind of went along. We knew what the problem was, but we persisted in this fantasy about defending the perimeter. And I've worked in several organizations where we tried everything. We tried controlling the laptops that people would bring in. It doesn't work. It's you bring in infected laptops. Usually the enterprise's network is a little bit more dangerous than the outside world, right? There's more refined stuff waiting there. It's pretty confident that it knows what your world looks like. It's more sophisticated than just browsing around from some cafe. So what do you do? Well, that's the premise of our company. What we believe is that you have to protect the data itself. You have to protect the data at the data level. So now I have to navigate. There we go. So the question is one about control. You have data. It's okay if you don't have a network connection. Your data is safe, right? It's on your computer, no network connection. But data like that is not very useful. You really want to share it. You want to interoperate with other people. You want to be a productive member of the data universe, right? So what do? Well, you can try adding strong security to it. But I'll tell you, if you start off with a cardboard box and you add a safe lock to it, you still have a cardboard box. And you're not controlling or protecting anything. What this picture shows is that you have to do everything. You have to fix everything in the equation to actually have a safe. If you leave any part of the cardboard behind, the rats will get it. They'll figure out how to get in. So it's an unsolvable problem unless you do something different. So the other thing here is the question about controlling data, right? This is about governance. These are serious questions in enterprises. Who had access? When did they have access? Where were they when they did it? Right? So you really need visibility into the data. So if you encrypt the data, now you have encrypted data. When you take something that is plain text and you use a key, now you've protected this thing. Now you've got a key. You have to hide this key. Before you had to hide this stuff, right? Now you encrypted that. Now you have a key. You got to hide the key. You're back to where you started. I mean, essentially, you can't do it. So a server needs access to keys to operate against data. So this is kind of a catch-22 here. So you have to use encryption in a different way. So symmetric cryptography is the right? Same key to encrypt and decrypt. Asymmetric, certificate-based, or key pairs, right? WIT Diffie, a close friend of mine, one of the co-inventors of Diffie-Hellman. Symmetric cryptography is very simple. It's very elegant. It's very efficient. And if you combine symmetric cryptography with a couple of other techniques, such as keeping the keys away from the actual users and only using them programmatically, and if you combine cryptography or symmetric cryptography with access controls, and I'll describe what I mean by this. I'm not talking about the access controls which kept me from bringing up the presentation. I'm talking about access controls that are rules around the data. If you combine these things together, you have a different kind of a problem for somebody to break into. You've made it a lot harder. What you end up with is what I call persistent control over your data. So I can make a copy of the same file 1,000 times. Speak up? Okay. It's okay to yell. So I can make a copy of the same file an infinite number of times, right? It's the sorcerer's apprentice problem, right? The broom that keeps dividing and dividing. So that's what data looks like in our data universe. We've got, when was the last time you cleaned up your file system, right? I mean, it's crazy, right? The number of copies of the same thing that you have. So each of those copies, I have a file, I email it to you. Where does it exist? Well, it exists as the form that I had on my computer, and it exists as a form in Exchange on my server. Where's my backup? My backup is your Exchange server, right? That's Jim's line. But so this thing, all of a sudden, there are multiple copies of it, and then you take it and you say, well, I know it's private, but this is really kind of interesting. I'm going to share it with this other guy. So there are like 5, 10, 50, it's like the social experiment. How many different copies can you possibly get? So you need to have the controls around the data. If you want to own your data, you can't just encrypt it and give somebody the key. That doesn't work. I mean, the key is propagated as often as the data is. It's crazy. So you have to do something different. So here's what we think. We think that the qualities of what you have to do should meet these criteria. So this data ought to have this quality which we can, well, it's a stretch, but we can say it's self-defending, right? But that's really what we want. We want the data to defend itself against an attempt to access it that I didn't want, right? And it goes against my will. It goes against my desire, my intent when I share the data. So it should only grant you access to the data if you meet the requirements that I defined for it. This is kind of like DRM, right? With music, it didn't work very well, but there are other reasons why it didn't work very well. So, with what? Least privilege? No, least privilege is a control in a system, and least privilege says that you as whatever your function is, let's say you're the hospital administrator, you should only have access to records pertaining to the operation of the hospital, not to any patient records or not to any accounting records, right? So it's a combination of things. It's a separation of duties. You should only be able to do, you should have privilege to do only what it is that you need to do, right? So LPP, least privilege principle, is more about that. Here in this case, what we're talking about is far more flexible. I want to be able to define on a per sharing basis what those controls ought to be. I forgot your name. Sherry. So if I send Sherry something, and if I want Sherry to only look at it and not be able to forward it or print it, I should be able to define that as a persisting control with the data that I send you. So that's, yeah. So self-defending data doesn't care if the network or the computer's hacked, which is going to happen, right? We agree, right? Anybody disagree? It's going to get hacked, right? Or you're going to hire this guy who's going to pass all your lie detector tests and then end up moving to Hong Kong and then Russia, right? So, I mean, it's just not going to happen. So it is at risk unless you do this kind of a thing. So the other things that self-defending, the other qualities are that every access needs to be audited. I want complete visibility into how my data is used. I mean, why not? If it's sensitive to me, if it's privileged, I want to know. And I should, as the originator of this, I should be able to say, you know what? I don't like the way that guy looked at me. I'm just going to rescind his access to the data, right? And then the last thing is that every copy of it needs to act the same way. So no matter how many brooms the Sorcerer's Apprentice is faced with, anytime anyone wants to use one of those brooms, it phones home and says, do I have permission to get opened up? So we looked at this, and we found that I had some prior experience here with what was called OrCon about 20 years ago. It's still called OrCon. You may be familiar with this term OrCon. It was in the Washington Post in the last several months, right? It was printed, this word was printed on some of those things that Snowden stole, right? Anybody doesn't think he stole them, he stole them. These pieces of paper that Snowden stole, it says OrCon on them. And what OrCon means is originator controlled. The intent of putting that stamp on that paper is that if I give you this piece of paper with it on it, you can't do anything with it. You're the recipient of it. You can only look at it, right? I control the distribution. That's what I call the pretend OrCon. That's the OrCon in faith, right? It's not real OrCon. It didn't work with Snowden, and it doesn't work in the real world. And to think otherwise is delusional. So but it's a great idea. It's a great idea, right? The idea that you as the owner of something should be able to say how it can be used after you share it with somebody is a great idea. So OrCon really extends what we call access controls, like role-based access controls or mandatory access controls, and Grant is going to talk about, I think you're going to talk about mandatory access controls, right? So multi-level systems enforce mandatory access controls. And Role-based access controls, attribute-based access controls, these are all different kinds of things. They're all very interesting in and of themselves, and they have different applicability in different realms. But if you kind of pick and choose some of the qualities from them, and you build something that is capability-based, then you can have something that you can actually call OrCon. And what you get is this idea of persisting originator control over the data. So it doesn't have to be originator control. It could be an organizational rule, right? The rules that are associated with the data could be based on our relationship. You work for HP, I work for Covata. Any relationship between Covata and HP that Covata defines has to have these following rules that are when we share data, right? So it makes sense, right? My relationship with you is very different than my relationship with my attorney, whom we'll probably, anyway, we'll leave him aside. So there might be a digital loss prevention system that attaches additional rules to the data. So it doesn't have to be originator defined. It makes sense that the originator should have some input into it, but in many cases, the originator doesn't know or doesn't care. He's just doing his job, right? In other cases, they really do know, and they really do care, and they want to be very explicit about it. So this system has to be flexible. Whatever it is that you do to control your data has to be very flexible. So I don't know if you can see this. Can you see it in the back? Do I have to read out every little bit in 6-point font here? No? Okay, I'll use this rubber band to point. At the top we have what we call key granting controls. These are controls that have to be met before the key is granted. So I give you an object, it's protected. You try to open it, it talks to the server. The server says, are these controls met before I grant the key to the client that's going to use it? And if they are, then the key is granted to the client. They can be anything. What we've built is a flexible framework that allows for the expression of rules. It looks like business rules, they're logical expressions. They can have to do with time, they can have to do with location, they can have to do with organizational relationships, right? It can be anything. It's a programmable framework that can be filled out, populated with your rules, right? Whatever you want. So different realms, healthcare, national security can use these. They would have their own rules, right? It would make sense that they would be populated differently. So the pre-key checks have to be met to the satisfaction. One of the rules might be, the kind of device. Does this device enforce security for me to the extent that I need it to? So that's a pre-key check form of OrCon. That's done on the server side. Then once the key is granted, the client has some options here. So the server maintains all these rules, and he then shares them with the client. If the client is intelligent, the client can enforce other rules, like no print, no copy and paste, right? Things like that. So this is really DRM on steroids. It's very flexible. It's not all predefined. It's any color you want it to be, not like the original Ford, right? So the third thing is this OrCon metadata, and that's just any name value pair that you want to define, we can store. All this scales, so it scales. The way it's been implemented is, well, I'll get into a little bit of that, but this is something that can run in an enterprise. It can run on a laptop for your stuff on the laptop. It can run as a service in a cloud. So it's just security technology that's been built in a foundational way, so it has broad applicability to different problems. So just really at a high level, it's all about control over your data. It extends your control, it empowers you cross-domain, between domains. inside the enterprise, outside the enterprise. It allows for ad hoc relationships and sharing. You don't need to have certificates to share data with somebody. You just need to know some identifier that they have, something like an email address and their cell phone number. That combination would be a two-factor authentication on their part. It could be much more sophisticated in terms of authentication. We don't care. We've built the basic stuff in. It's extensible. It's very lightweight, and it's completely flexible. So we can shape this to meet your needs. So here's what it looks like. We use REST for the communication. Everything is encrypted using transport layer security the right way, not the broken ways, the manifold broken ways. We've had this pen tested. We have an EAL certification, EAL4 certification for the previous generation. We just came out with our new generation in June, the end of June. That's under EAL certification in Australia, where my development team resides. And the crypto is all done using FIPS certified crypto. So it's a standard crypto. Don't buy anything from anybody, or don't try to invent your own crypto. It's been done the right way. Don't try to reinvent it. Best tip off when somebody tries to sell you anything security is, we've got this new kind of crypto. This is how it works, and the server does all the work on the back. We've got client libraries for C#, which is for Windows, right? Objective-C, iOS, the iOS domain, and Java. The rest of this talk goes a lot faster. Here's how it is used. So you have clients on the left-hand side by the cloud thingy. It goes through a firewall, load balancer. These are all data center services on the backside. And we segregate in the data center. We segregate and isolate different realms according to best practices. So you go straight through if you want to talk to us using just the core, pure Covata as a service. And that talks to these server instances. They scale according to, they multiply as and they go away. So this is cloud style, right? And they talk on the back end to the only place where there's any persistence, which is the database. And there are other people who make really good databases, right? So we don't have to reinvent that. We don't have to reinvent crypto. We don't have to reinvent databases. We don't have to reinvent a lot of stuff. We just have to put it together in a way so it makes sense. And then custom applications can run like that. It runs on a laptop. It runs on a server. It runs in cloud. It can be used a lot of different ways. It's very lightweight. Installs in about 20 seconds. Uses very standard components. Comes with its own application server inside of it. Comes with its own email system inside of it. And it's all prepackaged and good to go. So you just need a use case for it. And here are a couple of use cases. Here's how it can work. So a cloud service provider, a CSP, runs their physical infrastructure, and they virtualize that and express it as cloud services. They can use this to manage those sensitive components, that sensitive information inside their environment, like the certificates that they use, right? All the tokens and security stuff that they use on each system, right? And that changes constantly. The guys who operate it don't want to remember all the passwords. They just want to get access to the passwords. So they do that by authenticating to the servers, and it gives it to them. So there are lots of other use cases and examples here. So the value proposition is far more than just the thing as a service. It's the fact that what we've done is we've taken advanced encryption standard, AES, FIPS crypto, and wrapped it in libraries so that when you use it correctly. So if you adopt this technology and use our libraries, you don't have to figure out, I gotta go to, the book Crypto for Dummies, right? It because the way the libraries are set up, you will use the crypto correctly. So, and everything is standards based. That's it.